Clear prop.
How in the world did that happen? First, I think I need to do some little background explanation. I was just going to try to put this whole video in about 90 seconds, which is the regular Instagram real time, but there's no way I'd be able to explain the depth and the richness of this experience that was really once in a lifetime, I think. So, just to start off, where am I living? So we have a house, and I'm currently living in Cincinnati. The home that we just moved into this past summer, it's been about 10 years in the making. And it's hard for a community, people don't realize how hard it is for a community of priests to live in a neighborhood or an HOA community with a homeowners association. So for us to live in a community that's not really a residential home, because we're not technically a family, so we're living way out in the farm area. For us to travel anywhere downtown, from where we're living right now, minimum half an hour. So half an hour to an hour is usually our travel time to any single appointment. And so with that said, we live in an area where it just so happens the house is attached to this private grass field runway for airplanes. And it's really neat. There's only about 12 houses in this area, and it's a farm area, and so it's secluded. For us, it's kind of like a retreat house when we come home. With that said, our neighbors have planes. Yes, they have real legitimate planes. That one neighbor that I showed a couple days ago, I had a video where a neighbor had built a plane that took 12 years to build. He hand rolled all the pieces from a diagram. He saw a schematic year after year after year, and it wasn't a kit that he bought of these wings and these body parts and these engines putting it all together. He literally built the thing from scratch, rolled the metal himself, wrapped this vinyl material, heated it, coated it, heated it, and he's flying that thing. It's the coolest plane. So maybe someday, I can't ride in that plane because it's only one seat, but someday I'll give you a closer shot. Well, actually, I'll put a picture of that up here right now. But anyhow, how did this come about? One of the neighbors, he's currently a pilot right now for a company, and he flies his plane in and out every once in a while. He says, "Hey, would you like to go up someday?" I was like, "Of course, I'd like to go up." So what is my background? Some of you know, some of you don't know. I was a mechanic before. I worked for Mercedes-Benz. And so I just like tinkering. I like my hands. I like to wonder, and I'm curious about how things work. A couple years ago when I was in DC, I was bored and we didn't have a lot of money. And so I got this foam board from the dollar store for $1. And I went online where you could print this schematic onto this board, and you print it all out, you put it on there, you cut it out, and you piece these pieces together. It's old videos, you've seen this before if you followed me. You piece it together, and what is just a board turns into a plane, a glider plane, and you just throw it. The first time I threw that plane where it would stay level and it was just perfectly like level and it would just rise a little bit, actually, I discovered lift. I never understood that before. You hear it in school, you learn all about that, but to actually see it in action is a whole other thing. So I was fascinated by that lift. And at the same time, I've had a drone. I fly drones. You've seen some footages of that. And I have bits and pieces of other drones. So I started piecing this plane together with drone parts. And I was able to eventually fly it. I didn't have too many flights out of it before I crashed it and I just never put it back together. But I was able to fly this plane. And so I understand the dynamics of lift and using ailerons to roll and rudders to shift your yaw back and forth, the tail, and then elevators to go up and down. So I understand how planes work. And when I do have time to play video games, I do enjoy this game. It's a flight simulator where you're sitting in an airplane and you're just flying around and you're just seeing this beautiful scenery in the game itself. So I understand the mechanics of flying. I fly RC planes and I understand drift and how air works with flying drones. So with that as a background, when my neighbor invited me to come fly, I was like, of course. There's something about flying for me that is just out of this world, literally out of this world, this physical world here. And so I took the opportunity. It took a couple of days to set up an appointment, but it finally worked out. And and that morning, I asked him if our missionaries could come with him. He's like, yeah, sure, of course they can. But if you come alone, you can fly it. It's like, I can fly it? I just didn't realize that he would allow me to fly his plane. Turns out he's a flight instructor. But so turns out luckily the missionaries were busy doing other things anyway, so I came alone. I was thinking that he was gonna get the plane up in the air, get everything set, trim it out. It's almost like a cruise control in the air. And then he'd let me hold on to the yoke and I get to like maybe roll it over a little bit back and forth for a few minutes. And that would be just out of this world. But what ended up happening was he explained to me the basics, because it's a private plane in cases of emergency, how doors work and all the instrument paneling and everything. And I was like, yeah, I understand how lift works, but from my experience from the little cardboard plane there. And he's like, oh, neat, so you understand. And I understood his language, and the questions that I was asking, he was like, oh yeah, those are good questions for how a newbie pilot would be asking. So his confidence in me was growing little by little. And we sat down, he gave me the headphones. It's really neat. It's like noise canceling. I can listen to him as if he's like right next to me with none of the noise. He was showing me all the instrument panels, all the altimeter and the direction, all of those. And I've seen this before because I've played the game. I understand. I know what I'm looking for when I'm like flying in the game. So we got all set up. He got onto the runway. We checked the engine, the heating coils, and the magnetos, the backup magnetos, and the prop angles and everything. It's like neat. So we got on the runway, which is literally right in front of our house, on the other side of this building here, this house. He set the throttle. He set the flaps, got off the brakes, and he's like, all right, pull back. Pull back. And as I was pulling back, he's like, okay, be careful with your rate of climb. I don't want to go too high because I'll stall out. I was able to pull that plane back and take off and leave the ground. That was mind-boggling, that experience right there. So I was pulling back, and there was a side wind a little bit, so I was just correcting a little bit with the ailerons. And I could feel on my feet are where you correct your rudder, and I could feel what he's doing there, so he got to come in a little bit and adjust it for the side wind, just a slight breeze coming in that day. So we got up, and as we were climbing all the way up to about 2,200 feet, I got up there, and he just walked me through it, and it was so neat. Just to see yourself leaving the ground, coming up into this other world, out of this body experience. I fly drones, I see from top down, but this is something else when you see it with your own eyes. So I was up there, I got to fly, and I'm just holding onto the steering wheel, and so the yoke, and I was just enjoying it. But there's so many things going on, you couldn't really see and take in everything. Eventually he said, hey, turn left. So I just turned about 90 degrees, and he said, keep going. 180, keep going. So we did a loop. And then he had me do a right-handed loop. And I didn't know exactly how far I was going, because when you're up there, you're kind of disoriented. Things just move, and you don't know where they end or how they are. And he says, okay, pick a reference point. So we saw water towers, or there was a theme park called Kings Island. And he says, all right, turn over there. You see Kings Island? Keep that in your center and do one loop until Kings Island comes back. That was fascinating. So they're flying by ground reference. And that's one of the classes of airplanes. You fly only when you can see down below. And so we did a loop, I did a left loop, and technical thing, but I want to share it anyways because it's really cool. When you're turning the plane rolling with your ailerons, it's going to dip down because you're losing airflow going over the wings. So one thing you could do is raise the throttle to keep it up, or raise the nose to keep it up. And I was aiming, I saw the altimeter, I was aiming to make sure that it was within just that range that he wanted me to be at. And he's like, well, you're really good. You're probably one of the best first-time flyers I've ever had. This was just so cool. That compliment it gave me a lot more confidence in flying. We did a loop, and then he's like, here, try a tighter loop. So my first loop took maybe 30 seconds to do it. And he's like, try a tighter loop, which takes about 10 seconds to do. What I did not experience or expect to experience, which I've never felt before, whether flying in drones or planes, because, example, when I'm flying an RC plane, I can see the plane. If you want it to go right, I just shift it right on the controller, just go left. But when it's turning backwards, everything is backward, like all the controls are backwards. And I understand, I know the feeling, I know when a plane drifts, how to correct it. But what I've never felt before were the G-forces that come down upon you. And that was something new. I don't think it was a lot of G-forces, but I started to feel sick, to be honest with you. And it's like, it just really pressed down on my body, and it was more of a real experience of flying. And I gave this example the other day in a talk, and I was speaking about how very often we grow up and we have all these ideas of all these theories, or we grow up being catechized and in the family, we pray the rosary, and we know what's good and what's bad, morally speaking. But the moment we get old enough to where, or just like when we experience sin, or we get into that opportunity, speaking with young people, it's like when you go on that first date, or like she touches my hand and all the emotions, is like, it's all out the window. Because now for the first time, it's no longer theory like what I had in my mind, but it's experiential. And being experiential, it's a whole nother world, whether it be just a few G's, or I don't even know if it was one full G. No, 1 G is at ground level, so I don't know. But it wasn't that much, but I felt the pressure on me, and it was like really, it made me feel woozy already. So in the same way, we can have all this theory in our mind and be such a good Catholic, I can morally do this, and I can be very judgmental on other people who don't live up to those expectations. But when I put on that experience, how do I respond? And my body physically did not respond very well. Started to feel sick, but in the same way, with all that theory that we have, maybe we just haven't been tested morally as somebody else. So kind of a quick point I have here is not to judge others, because we have no idea what it does to ourselves when we're put in that same situation. That aside, I kept flying. We got to go over the city. And what was also really neat was that he'd call in for traffic control to one of the smaller airports, and the dialogue that he had was he would call out his tail name, his tail number of his plane. It's like it's like the license plate of your plane. You tell them your altitude, which is the height, and then your direction, and then what action you want to take, from what I understood. And it was really neat because they responded. It's like, yep, copy that, or you're okay for that direction. When we got across that bridge, we want to turn northeast or northeast, whatever it was. And they said, okay, yeah, good. And then when we got to it, the instructor, my neighbor, he said, okay, we're here, we're ready for the turn. And then he would call that out, and they would say, yes, you're approved. And then I would just simply turn. I could see my heading, and I just turned toward the degrees that he told me what he wanted me to go to, and degrees in like the compass. And then I kept my altitude, and we just kept going. So we did it a few times, and I really felt like a pilot. Once again, I have never sat in a cockpit before, ever in my life, a real cockpit. And the fact that I was doing these maneuvers was very surreal. Like somebody entrusted, in a sense, their life in my hands, though he has a yoke right next to him as well. He could take over 100% any second. But I asked him while we were up there, like, aren't you scared? He's like, actually, you're really good. I'm just looking out the window. And just that experience in itself. I kind of jokingly say to guys, I pretty much can drive anything with wheels. I grew up driving cars like everybody else. I ride motorcycles. I've driven 18-wheelers, backed up trailers. I ride a one wheel, so I have 1 wheels, 2 wheels, 4 wheels, 18 wheels, but I've never driven anything with no wheels, a plane. And this is another one on my list of things where I never thought I'd get to do or experience. And God just keeps on doing that over and over and over. So I got to fly. As we were coming back home, he was directing me back to water towers that I know in this area. He's like, okay, you see that water tower? That's Fay Road, da-da-da. All right, you see over to the left of it? That's the runway. And I was like, whoa, I get to see our house from up in the sky. And he's like, all right, start your heading over there. So I started making it over there. But let's just say the runway's here. We were like at this angle coming in, so I can't just go at it. I have to like turn and shift over. In my mind, I know how to do that on the controller, but in a real plane, it's like, okay, applying my mental, practical, like theoretical experience down to within my hands was a whole nother story. But I knew what to do, so little by little, I started to come in and straighten it out. And I was like, okay, so, and he says, there's a saying when you ask the other pilot to take over, there's a saying, I don't remember what it was now, but I was like, okay, I'm ready for you to take it over, so we're to come in for a landing. And he was like, okay, so take it down. I was like, take it down? Take it down? So I was like, he was entrusting me to bring the plane down after I had already set it straight to come down on the runway, which is right here. It's like on the other side of our house here. I started bringing it down. He had me correct my altitude a few times, but it was just, I don't even know how to explain to you the amount of trust that he had. I feel like I could have sneezed and tapped on the rudder or on the yoke, and we could have just hit a house. But he had this trust, this confidence in me. that I didn't even have in myself. And to me, that was a reflection in hindsight. It's like God does that too. Sometimes I don't even trust myself, but God does. And he was allowing me to come down. And it was kind of scary. It was like the houses were coming really fast by now. But I started to bring it down. And as soon as, right before coming down, he took over about 50, 60, 70% of the controls. And I could feel it. And then about 80, but he allowed me to hold on to the yoke itself and my feet on the rudder. I felt everything that he was doing. He was like guiding me down. And I got to like kind of put some pressure on it. It was fascinating, absolutely fascinating. And for me, it's so out of this world, it was not even on my bucket list. That's how out of this world this was, to where not only was it not on my bucket list, made it onto my bucket list to be able to fly in a small plane. And then in that moment, God just shoots the expectations out the window and he says, go ahead, don't just fly, but I'll let you fly itself, have control of it. So that's a lot. That's 15 minutes of speaking about this one experience that I had. And all to bring it back and to share that God, when I allow him to take the wheels, when I allow him to take the yoke in this case, our life has no limits. And I often share with people that I'm actually, quite frankly, I'm a very selfish person. People watch my videos, or they see my talks, or they hear in confessions or whatnot, they think I'm very generous. But the truth is I'm very selfish. And how I explain that is because if God was not so good to me, in the sense of every step of the way that God has just taken the reins and led me forward, my life has been more like fulfilling, more satisfying, just amazing in every way. Is it easy? No, not always, not at all. Sometimes it's very painful, extremely painful, experience of pain where I've never even felt or could feel that capacity for pain before. But yet, there's something within me. It's like I was made for this. And so he keeps on leading me more and more and more in this direction. And I remember when I first entered, I said, God, that's it. I'm never going to travel the world. I'm never going to get to see these people or do this or have that. And I could see God from up in heaven. It's like, hey, watch this. Let me flex. Let me show you. Let me be God. And he's done so much more in my life than I could have ever imagined. Like I said, I couldn't even dream of having this on a bucket list to even have it on the list at all. But with all of that said, this one experience, which blows my mind, and then there are other ones that are very similar, which I really have to go back. Like, moments like this, I promise you, in a few months, I'm going to, in a sense, forget, because something will outdo this. And on top of all of this, all of these awesome, amazing human experiences are not the best thing about my priesthood. The best thing about my priesthood, I can't tell anybody about. They're the things that I experience in just hearing people's relationship with God in confession, being a mediator and sitting there and just hearing and accompanying people in spiritual direction. It blows this experience out of the water. That's how amazing God's graces are. So, just to close this up, I just wanted to share that with you, because I know that when I posted these videos, people are wondering, it's like, how are you flying, or how are you doing this? One, he is a trained instructor. Two, he saw that I have experience. And once I started taking the yoke, he's like, well, you're pretty good. So he just let me fly. So for about really 38 minutes of that 40-minute flight, I had almost full control. I gave it to him for a few minutes because I wanted to take those pictures. That's why we have the footage. But I want to share that with you. And never put limits on what God can do. If I can assure you, well, based on my experience, there are only a few things that we can guarantee in life. Well, we know that taxes and death we cannot avoid. But one more thing I want to add to that one that far supersedes that one is that God will never, ever be outdone in generosity. And this is one of those experiences. So I hope that you too can let him take the reins. Let him not just sit in the passenger seat, but let him take the reins of your life. Let him lead. Trust him. If he asks, don't be afraid of saying yes. If he asks, he has a plan for you. If he asks, that means he's already giving you the grace to be able to hear his voice. Respond. God is good. He is your Father. He loves us very much. He knows us more than we know ourselves, and he wants to give us more than we can ever imagine. That's it. God bless you. Have a wonderful day. Bye.